What's up YouTube, Capital G here, giving you guys a quick card discussion on 3 under the radar, but in my opinion, incredibly solid and valuable tech options coming out of the side, or even quite possibly in certain situations, the main deck. These are cards that I feel like have become a lot more valuable as this format is taking shape, and obviously we got a lot of new information with the UDS that took place over the weekend, and over the past couple of weeks, things have definitely been changing and evolving in the competitive meta, especially the the rise of the Invoke SHADDOll deck that is kind of coming out of nowhere in the last couple of weeks. Obviously this weekend we'll have the full shebang because we got 2 YCSs happening simultaneously, one in Europe and then one obviously here in the States, and these are just cards I think you need to know about because I think that they're very good right now. Also, if you're a budget player, I got your back here. All of these cards are absolutely budget friendly. I think that these cards can all be picked up for under $1, so that's not going to be an issue. Also, if you guys do like discussion videos like this, give the video a thumbs up. That way I know that you guys want to see more videos like this in the future. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into the first card, which is Dimensional Barrier. So if you watch my video on 5 cards you needed to pick up before Master Rule 5, this was the first card on the list, and you know that I'm very high on Dimensional Barrier moving forward throughout this year. I thought that Konami would give more support to the Fusion, Ixie, and Synchro mechanics, and that has definitely come to fruition. We already know about a bunch of archetypes that are going to be based on those mechanics. I also thought that a lot of the older players would pick up some of their older decks and want to play those in Master Rule 5, thus you'd be able to capitalize off the power and versatility of this card, but I really didn't think that this card would have so much potential before we even got the MR5, but obviously Shaddolls and Invoked have just invaded the meta, and the fact that people are playing them together in one deck makes it even better. We already know how powerful this card can be in the hero matchup. Basically, if you flip this over against heroes, they're not going to have a very good time. They have a couple of, I'm going to say, borderline mediocre plays that maybe won't warrant them scooping immediately, where maybe they can just search for like an honest Neos and pass, or they can consolidate all of their resources into like a desperate plasma summon and hope that you can't out it and maybe it gets them there. But generally it's going to shut down heroes, and it pretty much has the same effectiveness against Shaddol or Invoked as well. Obviously if they're not able to get their fusion monsters on board, you're taking away a lot of power from those archetypes and their ways of essentially kind of controlling the game. I also like the fact that even if your opponent does have those monsters on the field, and we know things like Winda and Caliga can just completely slow the game down in the favor of the Invoke Shaddol player, it can make the game be played at their pace. This card can be flipped up and essentially just kind of be used as an infinite impermanence. It can just negate the effects of those floodgate monsters. So if you're playing like a combo deck, you can start turboing out your monsters. You don't have to worry about the restrictions that those fusion monsters are putting on the field. So even if your opponent does happen to have those fusions on field, you can still get value out of this card. I think that I also really love the fact that you can shotgun this. If you're playing a more control based deck or like a stun deck and your opponent has that blowout card, the evenly match or the lightning storm, because those are quite common right now, you can flip this over and still be able to use it. Things like Impermanence or maybe Solemn Strike, while those are fantastic cards, they pretty much falter in those situations. And it's not just about the fusion decks. Even if you happen to run into like the pendulum matchup, this card absolutely destroys pendulums as well. It's not just about stopping the pendulum summon. You guys know right now pendulums have multiple ways of summoning pendulum monsters without actually using the pendulum summon, using the Endymion cards or the mythical beast monsters to summon pendulum monsters. This just shuts all of that down. It basically makes it so they get their one normal summon of like Blue Boy, and that's essentially it. So right now I'm really loving Dimensional Barrier. Next up, I want to talk about Retaliating Sea, and this is a card that slowly but surely people are starting to come around to and starting to realize that it has a lot of power in this format. I think when you mention Retaliating Sea, a lot of people seem to harken back to like Necroz because it was a very solid option when dealing with the Necroz deck. A lot of people usually think of ritual summoning when you look at Retaliating Sea because the monster does have to be special summoned by a spell effect. However, it's very good against fusion summoning as well, and right now we got a lot of fusion summoning in the format, whether it be things like Fusion Destiny, Invocation, or Shadow Fusion. This card can be very effective against against Shaddolls, and it can be very effective against invoked heroes, etc., etc. One thing that I like about this card is once it hits the field, it basically is a Dark Law against your opponent. That meaning that this card is a 100% hard counter to the entire Shaddoll archetype. If your opponent can't get those monsters in the graveyard, well, their Shaddoll monsters are not going to be able to activate their crazy effects. Also, when your opponent activates El Shaddoll Fusion or the original Shaddoll Fusion, and you go ahead and drop this guy, not only will their monsters get banished, but even their fusion cards are going to get banished as well. So if your opponent can somehow take your Retaliating Sea off the field, they won't even be able to recover that fusion spell, which is, you know, part of the power of the fusion monsters. The fact that they kind of float back into the spell for free, that's just not going to happen because the spell card won't be in the graveyard. And actually, that's very relevant when it comes to the invoke matchup as well. If your opponent tries to summon an invoke monster with invocation, you summon the Retaliating Sea, the invocation will not hit the graveyard, thus you're cutting your opponent off from the Alistair train where they're constantly able to, you know, summon Alistair and basically juggle the card multiple times, search invocation, all from a single copy of Alistair. All of that train is going to be interrupted. Your opponent's not going to be able to recycle Alistair, and they also won't be able to use the Alistair from hand defensively, whether it be negating with like Macabre or using it to, you know, gain 1,000 attack and defense. This card can also be used against the hero matchup when your opponent uses something like Fusion Destiny or Polymerization. I think it's a little better specifically against Fusion Destiny because your opponent does generally want to send some of those annoying Destiny hero monsters that activate effects in the graveyard. Destiny heroes are notorious for having very strong graveyard effects. Things like Malicious can instantly banish themselves to summon, you know, more copies of Malicious, and a lot of the D heroes just have good like utility effects that can be activated from the graveyard. If you're making it so your opponent doesn't get that monster in the graveyard, then obviously you're going to be in a very good position. One of the reasons that Retaliating Sea is so attractive right now is the fact that it is such a strong option if you're going second. The fact that it activates as a hand trap is very hard for your opponent to stop. It's not a hand trap like Ash Blossom or Ghost Ogre where it's sent to the graveyard and your opponent can just kind of snipe it out with something like Called by the Grave. This is more akin to something like Fantastical Dragon Phantasme or Nibiru. It's a card that does special summon itself, so, you know, Called by the Grave is not going to be effective against it. But unlike those cards, this one isn't very difficult or clunky to use when it's on the field. Since it is just a level 4 monster at the end of the day, this card opens up some Exceed plays, and we know how awesome the rank 4 Exceed pool is, just as Lunalight players. So if you're playing some rank 4s, maybe Utopia, Double, Evil Swarm, a Cyton Knight, basically this is like gonna put you halfway there, and the rank 4 pool doesn't seem to be getting weaker anytime soon. You can always go into things like number 41 Magusta, Tornado Dragon, Abyss Dweller, all solid options. So it's really nice to not only disrupt your opponent, but then have a level 4 monster on field so that you can go into, you know, a Link monster if you want it, or just one of those powerful rank 4 Exceed monsters. So I feel like Retaliating Sea, definitely a strong card. The final card I want to talk about is Paleozoic Dinomischus, and I really feel like this is one of the best and most versatile spot removal cards in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. I think that people need to look at this more. I used to always internally compare this card with Phoenix and Windblast, which is kind of an old school GX card that is very similar. It doesn't banish the card, it puts it on the top of your opponent's deck. Against extra deck monsters, kind of like the same thing, but Dinomischus does not discard as a cost, and that's where I feel like it has a little more value, especially if you're targeting one of your opponent's monsters and they do some trickery where maybe they get the monster off the field, or they do some type of thing where you can't you know, get rid of the monster. You don't actually have to discard that card. The reason that I like Dinomischus is because it answers a lot of the problems that these combo decks are having with these stun fusion monsters. We know right now Invoked is a deck, well, Invoked Shaddolls, they're a deck that can throw these fusion monsters at you, these monsters that super stun you out of the game, things like, you know, El Shaddoll Winda or the Invoked Caliga. These cards limit your options on how many summons you can get or your battle phase or whatever. They make it really difficult for you to be able to combo and essentially essentially put the board on field that you want to play. But this card kind of answers that. Not only can it get rid of these fusion monsters and basically any monster that your opponent puts on field as long as it is able to be targeted, but at the same time, this card doubles as spell and trap removal. And that's where I feel like the versatility of this card is definitely worth looking at, because it isn't just that you can take out those stun monsters or any problematic monster your opponent puts in front of you, but if you're going against a deck and you're going first, maybe your opponent throws that really lame Mystic Mine at you, instead of sitting there for 10 turns being able to not do anything, you can just flip this over, take out the Mystic Mine, and play Yu-Gi-Oh! How you want to play. Also, later in the duel, if any player activates a trap card, you do get to summon your Dinomischus back from the graveyard, and then that can just be an extra 1200 attack body you used as offense, or you can just give it up for a link summon of a link monster as long as that link monster allows you to use, normal monsters. I'm usually not super big on spot removal cards that have discard effects attached to them. However, the versatility of Dinomischus definitely has me sold, and a lot of times it just feels like these decks that can play Dinomischus, they don't have a lot of good answers for these fusion stun monsters or for Mystic Mine, and this card kind of saves you the trouble of having to pick and choose. Do I want to run some spell and trap removal in my main deck, or do I want to run impermanence for those fusion stun monsters, or Inspector Border? You kind of have this card, which is both combined into one. And if you're playing a deck like Salamangreat, you have so much discard fodder in your archetype anyways. You're already playing Signet Mining, which requires a discard, and so many of the Salamangreat monsters can summon themselves freely back from the graveyard. Even cards like Rage or Roar, you can get those back from the graveyard with Sunlight Wolf. So I do think that this is one of the better cards in the format when it comes to spot removal. It might even be, honestly, the best because of the versatility, because it can take out the floodgates, the mines, and the other back row cards you don't want to deal with, but at the same time, it can also get rid of monsters. So anyways, you guys let me know what you thought of my 3 cards. Again, if you guys like discussion videos like this, let me know in the comment section below so I can keep making these discussion videos. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.